The unexpected beginning. The wind howled outside the small old house. Inside, the room was dimly lit by the soft glow of a table lamp. In the corner, a young man named Leo sat at a wooden desk, staring at the faded old letter he had just found. His heart raced, and his hand shook as he carefully unfolded it. It was a letter that had been hidden in his family for generations, tucked away in the attic, wrapped in an ancient cloth. Leo had never imagined it would lead him to something so strange. Leo had always thought his family was normal, just like any other family. His father was a quiet man, focused on his work. His mother was kind but distant, always telling him to focus on his studies. But that night, everything changed. The letter he had found was not like any letter he had ever seen. The writing on it was not in English or any language he recognized. It was a strange script, full of symbols he had never seen before. At first, Leo thought it was just some old family heirloom, something his ancestors had kept as a memory. But as he read it carefully, he realized that it was much more than that. The letter told a story that Leo could not believe, yet somehow, deep down, he felt it was true. His family had been keeping a secret that was tied to an alien race. The letter spoke of a promise made by his great-great-grandfather, a promise that bound their family to an alien girl from a distant planet. She had saved his ancestor's life during a great war, and in return, his family had sworn to protect her. Leo felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what to think. Aliens? A promise? It all seemed like something out of a science fiction movie. But the letter seemed so real, and the symbols on it were unlike anything he had ever seen. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he had read. How could his family be connected to an alien? Was it all just some fantasy, or was there some truth to it? Leo's family had never talked about this, and he had never heard any mention of an alien girl. But as he sat there, the words from the letter seemed to echo in his mind. The promise must be kept, the letter said. For the safety of our worlds, the bond between our families must never be broken. She will return, and when she does, you must be ready. Who was she? And why had his family never told him about her? Leo couldn't stop thinking about these questions. He couldn't understand why this secret had been kept from him for so long. The letter had been written in the early 1800s, yet the words seemed as if they were meant for him, meant to reach him now. With trembling hands, Leo carefully put the letter back in its envelope. His heart was still pounding as he stood up, pacing the room. He tried to tell himself that it was all nonsense, that it couldn't be true. But something deep inside him told him otherwise. There was something about the letter, something in the way it spoke of a promise, that made him feel as if he was connected to this alien girl, even though he had never met her. Leo decided to go to the one person who might have some answers, his grandmother. She had always been the one to tell him the family stories, the tales of their ancestors. But she had never mentioned anything about an alien girl. Maybe she knew something. Maybe she could explain what this letter meant. He drove to her house the next morning, still thinking about the strange letter. His grandmother's house was an old cottage, just like his own. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with ancient family records, old journals, and pictures of relatives from long ago. Leo knocked on the door, and his grandmother answered, smiling warmly as always. But when she saw the worried look on his face, her expression changed. "Leo, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. He held up the letter. "Grandma, I found something. Something about our family. Something I don't understand." Her eyes grew wide as she took the letter from him. She sat down in her favorite chair, motioning for Leo to do the same. He sat down, watching her closely. She began to read the letter silently, her face growing more serious with each passing moment. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "You found it," she whispered. "The letter that was never supposed to be found." Leo's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What's going on? Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" His grandmother sighed, setting the letter aside. Because we've always tried to keep it hidden. The truth about your family's connection to the alien girl was never meant to be known. It's a part of our past we thought was lost. But why? What happened? Leo pressed, feeling a sense of urgency. She looked at him with deep, knowing eyes. Because your family made a promise long ago, and now it's time for you to fulfill it. Leo was stunned. He had no idea what she meant, but he could feel that something big was about to happen, something that would change everything he knew about his family and his own future. The mysterious letter had set something in motion, and he was no longer able to ignore the pull of fate. For the first time, Leo realized that his life would never be the same again. The first encounter. Leo couldn't shake the weight of the letter and his grandmother's words. The more he thought about it, the more it felt like his whole life had been a series of carefully placed clues, leading him to this one extraordinary moment. He had always believed his life was normal. Studying at university, spending time with friends, enjoying the quiet of his family's old house. But now, everything was shifting and nothing felt ordinary anymore. He sat in his room that night, the letter in his hands, staring at the strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint glow under the dim light of his desk lamp. His mind raced with questions. Who was the alien girl? What did his family's promise mean? And why had they kept this secret for so long? Unable to sleep, Leo knew he had to dig deeper. He couldn't just ignore the strange feeling inside him. The pull of something unknown, but undeniably powerful. He needed answers. He had to find out more. The next morning, Leo took the letter and headed straight to the old family library, hidden in the farthest corner of his grandmother's house. It was a room filled with ancient books, some so old the leather bindings were cracked and the pages brittle with age. It had always fascinated Leo as a child, but he had never thought to spend much time there. His grandmother had told him it was filled with old family history, but he had never truly understood its importance, until now. Dust hung in the air as Leo carefully browsed through the rows of books, his fingers brushing over titles written in languages he couldn't even begin to understand. At the back of the library, in a small wooden chest, Leo found something that seemed to call out to him. It was an old weathered book, bound in deep red leather. The book had no title, no markings on the cover, but when Leo touched it, a shiver ran down his spine. It felt different, like it was waiting for him. He opened the book carefully, his heart pounding as he flipped through the pages. The symbols on the letter matched some of the symbols in the book. He recognized the same strange markings, ones that seemed to move and shift on the page. As he turned the pages, the words began to make sense in his mind, though he couldn't explain how. The book spoke of a race of beings, far from Earth, who had made contact with his family centuries ago. It was as if his ancestors had been entrusted with a responsibility to protect a girl from this alien race, a girl whose life was linked to the fate of the entire universe. Leo read for hours, his mind racing with the impossible truth unfolding before him. His family had not only promised to protect this alien girl, but they had also been part of a much larger conflict that spanned across galaxies. The book described the girl's world, a place of beauty and danger, and the enemy forces that threatened her life. It was clear now that the promise his family had made was not just some old superstition. It was a matter of life and death. As the sun set, Leo closed the book, overwhelmed by everything he had learned. His mind was a whirl of confusion and excitement, but one thought stood above all others. He needed to find this alien girl. He had to keep the promise his ancestors had made. But how? Where was she? How could he possibly reach her? Then, as if answering his unspoken question, the air in the room grew cold. Leo shivered as he stood, feeling an unusual presence in the room. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of being watched. His eyes darted around the room, but there was nothing there, nothing visible at least. Suddenly, there was a soft hum, like the sound of electricity vibrating in the air. Leo's heart skipped a beat as he looked down at the book in his hands. The symbols that had been still for hours began to glow faintly, pulsing with a soft blue light. He stared, transfixed, as the symbols shifted and rearranged themselves into a new pattern. A map. It was a map of the stars. Leo's breath caught in his throat. The map was pointing to a distant location in the cosmos, a place far beyond Earth, beyond anything he had ever heard of. The coordinates were clear. The alien girl was waiting for him. The book had somehow linked him to her, and now he was being called to fulfill the promise his family had made. His pulse quickened as he tried to process everything. How was this even possible? How could he, just an ordinary human, be the one to save an alien girl from a war across the stars? And what would it mean for his future? For his family's safety? For the fate of two worlds? Before he could fully comprehend what had just happened, a sudden noise from the window broke his thoughts. Leo spun around, his eyes narrowing as he saw a shadow move outside. It wasn't a bird or a tree branch. It was too deliberate. Someone, or something, was out there, watching him. His heart raced, and a sense of dread settled over him. Leo approached the window cautiously, his breath shallow. He peeked through the curtains, but saw nothing. His pulse thudded in his ears. He knew someone was out there, someone who had been following him, waiting for the moment he uncovered the truth. He had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but one thing was certain: his discovery hadn't gone unnoticed. As he turned away from the window, a single thought ran through his mind. The adventure was just beginning. The alien girl was out there, and the danger was already closing in. The clock was ticking. The family's dark secret. Leo couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every step he took in his house, every turn of his head, felt as if eyes were lingering just out of sight. It wasn't just the strange sensation he had when he found the map, or the shadow he had seen outside the window. It was something deeper, something connected to the letter and the book he had uncovered. The family secret was no longer a mystery confined to the pages of old books. It had become his reality. Determined to learn more, Leo returned to his grandmother's house the next morning. He had to confront her again, to understand the truth behind the promise his family had made. She had known something all along. He could feel it in the way she had reacted when he first showed her the letter. There was fear in her eyes, fear of something she had kept hidden for far too long. His grandmother was in the kitchen when Leo arrived. She looked up, startled to see him again so soon. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her apron. She knew what he was there to ask, and he was ready to hear it, no matter how hard it would be. "Grandma," Leo said, his voice steady but full of urgency, "you have to tell me everything. The promise, the alien girl, what happened to our family." His grandmother hesitated, then slowly sat down at the old wooden table. The weight of the years seemed to press down on her, and Leo could tell that whatever she was about to say, it would change everything. "You're right," she began quietly. "There are things about your family's past that should never have been kept hidden. But I never wanted to burden you with the truth. It was never supposed to be part of your life. We did our best to erase it, to let the past remain buried." Leo leaned forward, his eyes locked onto her. "What do you mean? What happened?" She took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. "Your great-great-grandfather. He was a man of honor, but he made a terrible decision. During a time of war, he encountered an alien race. They weren't like the stories you've heard. They weren't here to conquer or invade. They were fleeing, running from a dark force that was destroying their world." Leo felt his heart race as his grandmother spoke, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. "But why did my family get involved? Why keep it a secret?" "Because the alien race, these beings, they were bound to us, to your family," she continued, her eyes distant as if seeing the past unfold before her. "Your great-great-grandfather made a promise to their leader, to protect a young girl from their world. She was the key to stopping the force that threatened their existence, and your family was chosen to keep her safe, to ensure her survival, and to guard the secrets of her world. Leo's mind spun. He had never imagined something so extraordinary. But why did they choose us? Why did my great-great-grandfather make that promise? His grandmother's face darkened. The connection between our families goes back generations, long before your great-great-grandfather. It was an ancient bond, a pact that was forged in a time when humans and these alien beings lived in harmony. But after the war, things changed. The enemy they were fleeing from followed them to Earth, and your family became their target. Leo felt a chill in the air. So, my family has been protecting her all these years, and now they're still after us. Yes, she whispered. For centuries, we've kept her secret safe, but every generation has had to make a sacrifice to ensure that the promise is honored. The enemies that your great-great-grandfather fought, they never stopped hunting her. And now, they know you've uncovered the truth. They'll stop at nothing to find her and destroy anyone who stands in their way. The weight of her words hit Leo like a physical blow. His family's history was steeped in danger, sacrifice, and a burden that no one had ever spoken of. He had thought his life was ordinary, going to school, hanging out with friends, living in the same house for years. But now, it was all different. His family was connected to a hidden war, a war he had never known about until now. But why didn't you tell me this before? Leo asked, frustration rising in his voice. Why keep me in the dark? His grandmother's eyes filled with sorrow. Because I wanted to protect you. I wanted to give you a normal life. A life free from the danger that has shadowed our family for so long. But now, Leo, the truth is out. You're the one who has to carry this burden. You're the one who must fulfill the promise. It's your destiny. The room seemed to close in on Leo as he processed everything. The idea that he was now part of this secret, that the alien girl and her fate were intertwined with his own, was overwhelming. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to turn away and pretend none of this was real. But deep inside, he knew that wasn't possible. The truth had come for him, and there was no escaping it now. Where is she? Leo asked, his voice shaking slightly. Where do I find her? His grandmother didn't answer right away. She took a long, shaky breath, then stood up. She walked over to a shelf on the far wall, pulling down an old wooden box. The box was heavy, and as she opened it, Leo saw something that took his breath away. Inside was a small crystal, glowing faintly with the same blue light he had seen in the book. His grandmother held it out to him. This is the key, she said softly. It will lead you to her. But be careful, Leo. You're not the only one searching for her. The enemies are already on your trail. As Leo reached out and took the crystal, he felt its power surge through him, like a pulse in his own heart. The connection between him and the alien girl was stronger than he had ever imagined. There was no turning back now. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. It's your destiny. Call across the stars. The crystal in Leo's hand felt like it was alive. It hummed with an energy he could not explain, as if it was calling out to him from somewhere far beyond Earth. It was as if the universe itself was trying to reach him, pulling him toward something he had never imagined. He stared at the glowing object, mesmerized by the soft, pulsating light. The strange symbols from the letter flickered through his mind, and he knew this was the moment everything was going to change. With his grandmother's warning still fresh in his ears, Leo didn't waste any time. He needed answers. The crystal was the key, and he had no choice but to follow its pull. His grandmother had told him that it would lead him to the alien girl, the one his family had sworn to protect for generations. But how? How was he supposed to use this crystal to find her? And more importantly, how could he trust it? Sitting on the edge of his bed, Leo placed the crystal in his palm, unsure of what to do next. The room seemed to grow colder, and the soft hum grew louder. The air around him shimmered, as though reality itself was bending. For a moment, he wondered if he was losing his mind. But then something incredible happened. A voice, a soft, distant voice, whispered in his ear, "I've been waiting for you." Leo froze, his heart thudding in his chest. He looked around, but the room was empty. No one was there. The voice had come from within him, echoing in his mind like a memory he could not place. "You are the one who has to come. You are the one who can help me." The crystal in his hand pulsed once more, brighter now, as if reacting to the voice. And then, before he could fully comprehend what was happening, the light from the crystal expanded, filling the room. It was no longer just a light. It was a beam, stretching outward as though it was reaching for something far away, far beyond the stars. Suddenly, Leo felt his feet lift off the ground. Panic surged through him, but there was no time to react. The crystal pulled him upward, and in a blur, everything around him faded. The room, his house, his entire world disappeared. He was falling through a vortex of light and sound, his body weightless, his mind racing. The air was thick with energy, crackling around him like electricity. Time felt like it had stopped. There was only the crystal in his hand, its soft hum guiding him through the endless dark. Then, with a jolt, the world snapped back into focus. Leo stumbled, catching himself on his hands as he landed hard on solid ground. He blinked, disoriented, and slowly stood up. The first thing he noticed was the sky. It wasn't like Earth's sky at all. The air was thick with swirling colors, deep blues and purples, mixing with flashes of bright gold and silver. The stars shone brighter here, closer, as though they were within reach. The second thing he noticed was the silence. There was no sound, not even the wind. It was an eerie, still kind of quiet that felt both unnatural and peaceful at the same time. He was no longer on Earth. Leo looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel it now, the weight of destiny on his shoulders. He had followed the crystal, the voice, and it had brought him here. But where exactly was here? The land stretched out before him, barren and strange. Massive, jagged mountains loomed in the distance, and a large, glowing structure sat in the center of the landscape, an imposing, otherworldly city that seemed to pulse with life. And then he saw her. The alien girl. She stood at the edge of the city, her figure silhouetted against the glowing skyline. Her long, silver hair flowed like a river of light, and her eyes, glowing with the same strange energy as the crystal, were locked onto him. There was no mistaking it. This was the girl his family had been protecting for centuries. Leo's breath caught in his throat. She was everything the letter had promised. Her presence was both beautiful and terrifying, as though she held the power to change everything in the universe. The fate of her world, and perhaps his own, was bound to her. She took a step forward, and with that one movement, the ground beneath Leo's feet seemed to shift. The very air around him pulsed with power. It was as if the universe itself had aligned in that moment, and everything that had happened up until now led him to this point. "Leo," she said, her voice not a whisper this time, but clear and direct, filling his mind and heart with certainty. "You came." The words felt like a heavy weight in his chest, but they also sparked something deep within him. A sense of purpose, a sense that he wasn't here by accident, that his family's secret was not just some burden, but a calling. "I've been waiting for you," she repeated, taking another step closer, her glowing eyes never leaving his. "The enemies that followed me to your world are already here. You must protect me, Leo. Your family's promise. It's yours to fulfill now." Leo didn't know what to say. His mind was still reeling from the impossibility of it all. The voice in his head, the sudden journey across the stars, the alien world, and the girl who stood before him. But one thing was certain, he had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Her presence was overwhelming, but it was also comforting. It felt like he had finally found where he belonged, where his destiny had always been leading him. He had been chosen, whether he wanted it or not, to protect her and to fight the enemies that would destroy her, and perhaps everything he knew. But as the alien girl reached out her hand to him, Leo knew that this was only the beginning. The dangers were just starting, and the promise his family had made was more than just a story. It was a fight for survival, for the future of two worlds. And Leo was ready to face it. The chase. Leo had barely touched the alien girl's outstretched hand when the world around him suddenly trembled. A low rumble, like the growl of a distant storm, vibrated through the ground. The air thickened, turning electric with tension. The alien girl's eyes widened, and she quickly pulled her hand back, stepping away from Leo as if she could feel the danger coming before he could. "Get ready," she said urgently, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "They're here." Before Leo could ask what she meant, the first of them appeared, shadowy figures emerging from the distant mountains, moving with unnatural speed. They were cloaked in darkness, their forms barely discernible as they glided across the terrain. The alien girl didn't need to explain who they were. The hostility in the air was enough to tell him. These were the enemies, the ones his grandmother had warned him about. They were here to finish what they had started generations ago. Leo's heart pounded in his chest. He instinctively reached for the crystal in his pocket, but the alien girl shook her head. "No time," she said. "We need to move now." Without another word, she turned and sprinted toward the glowing city in the distance. Leo, caught in a mix of confusion and adrenaline, followed her, his feet pounding against the alien ground. The air around them felt charged, as if the very atmosphere was warning them of the dangers ahead. Leo's thoughts were a blur. He had only just arrived in this alien world, and already he was running for his life. He didn't know what was chasing them, or what he was supposed to do. But the alien girl, this mysterious, powerful being, had called to him. He had to protect her. That's what his family had promised. That's what he was born to do. As they ran, the alien girl's movements were fluid and precise, like she had been trained for this her entire life. She darted through the landscape with ease, navigating around jagged rocks and thorny plants that seemed to be alive with danger. Leo struggled to keep up, but the sense of urgency, the fear that gripped his chest, pushed him forward. Behind them, the shadows moved closer. There was something deeply unsettling about them. They didn't make a sound as they approached, no footsteps, no breath. Just the unsettling presence of something unnatural, something evil. The air felt thicker now, heavier, as though the enemies were using the very fabric of the world against them. Leo risked a glance behind him. He saw one of the shadowy figures break from the rest of the pack, moving fast, faster than anything he had ever seen. It was coming right for him. Panic surged through him. He had no weapon, no plan. All he had was his determination to protect the girl who had led him here. Leo's hand tightened around the crystal in his pocket, and in that moment, something shifted. The crystal vibrated, and he could feel its power radiating through his fingertips. The enemy was closing in, and there was only one thing Leo could do: fight. Before he could react, the alien girl, who had been leading the way, stopped in her tracks and turned to face him. With a swift motion, she reached into the air, and to Leo's astonishment, a weapon appeared in her hand, glowing with the same energy that the crystal emitted. It was a spear, long and sleek, its edge crackling with energy. She held it with ease, her gaze fierce as she prepared for the battle ahead. Leo's heart raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. This was real. The enemies were here, and they were just as dangerous as his grandmother had warned. The alien girl raised her weapon and pointed it at the incoming shadow. The figure, still moving with eerie silence, slowed slightly, as if sensing the power of her stance. Leo, still in shock, could only watch as the girl's eyes glowed brighter, and with a swift motion, she thrust the spear toward the shadow. A blast of energy shot from the weapon, cutting through the air with a sound like thunder. The enemy figure staggered back, a hiss escaping from its unseen mouth. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The shadow recovered quickly, leaping toward them once more, faster than before. "Leo, get ready," the alien girl shouted, her voice a mix of urgency and command. Leo, still unsure of what to do, grabbed the crystal. He held it out in front of him instinctively, as if it could protect him. To his surprise, the crystal responded. A pulse of energy shot from it, surrounding him in a shield of glowing light. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push the shadowy figure back for a moment. "Keep running," the alien girl shouted, pulling Leo to his feet. "The real fight is ahead. We have to reach the city. Now." They both turned and began to run again, the enemy now fully aware of their presence. But Leo felt something else stir within him, something he couldn't explain. The crystal in his hand pulsed with a newfound energy, as if it recognized the danger. He could feel its power building, as if it were preparing him for something even greater than what he had already witnessed. The landscape stretched out before them, the city growing closer with each step. But the shadows were relentless. The sky above them darkened, as though the very air was turning against them. Leo's pulse quickened. There was no time to waste. If they didn't reach the safety of the city soon, they would be overrun. And in that moment, Leo realized just how far he had come. He had come from a quiet, ordinary life to this strange world, where enemies from the depths of the universe were hunting them down. But he couldn't afford to doubt himself now. The alien girl had called to him. She had trusted him to fulfill the promise of his family. He had to do it. They weren't alone anymore, and the chase had only just begun. The final test. The alien city loomed ahead, glowing with an ethereal light. It stood like a beacon in the distance, its towering spires reaching into a sky filled with swirling energy. The ground beneath Leo's feet had begun to feel more solid, more connected to something greater than the battle they were fleeing from. Yet even as they neared the city, the enemies, those shadowy, relentless hunters, were closing in. The air grew thick, and every step Leo took felt heavier, as if the weight of fate itself was pressing down on him. The alien girl beside him, whose name he still didn't fully know, was moving with confidence and purpose. Her eyes were fixed on the distant city, her grip on her glowing spear unwavering, but Leo could see the strain in her movements. Every now and then, she glanced back, scanning the horizon. The shadows were not far behind. "We won't make it to the city in time," she said abruptly, her voice tinged with frustration and fear. Leo's stomach twisted with dread. "What do you mean?" "We have to get there. The city. There's safety in the city, right?" "There's safety," she said, her tone grim, "but only if you can prove yourself worthy of it. If we reach the gates now, they'll lock us out. We must first prove that we are not just two travelers, strangers to this world. We must show that you are the one, Leo." Leo felt a knot tighten in his chest. "What are you talking about? How am I supposed to prove anything?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stopped running and turned toward him, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. The power from the spear still hummed in her hand, but she lowered it to her side, meeting his gaze with an intensity that made him feel both small and important at the same time. "There is a trial," she said softly, "a trial that only the chosen can survive. A trial that will test you, not just your strength, but your heart, your courage, your ability to protect, to fight, and to sacrifice. Only if you pass this trial will the city's gate open to you, and only then can we stop the shadows from following us." Leo's mind spun. He had thought he was already part of some grand mission, that the journey had already begun. But this was different. This was real. The trial, whatever it was his final chance to save them both, to prove that he was the one his family's legacy had prepared him to be. Without another word, the alien girl stepped forward, raising her spear once again. A pulse of energy shot from it, and before Leo could react, the ground beneath them began to shift. The terrain rippled like water, and before he could comprehend what was happening, they were no longer running through the alien landscape. They stood now in an entirely different place. The air was heavier here, colder, and the sky above was swirling with a deep, swirling red, the color of blood. The ground beneath them was cracked, jagged, and dark. In the distance, Leo could see shapes moving, watching them. But this was no longer a place of safety. It felt like they had entered a realm of challenge, a space where the very fabric of reality itself was put to the test. The alien girl stood beside him, her posture unwavering. "This is the trial of the ancients," she said, her voice steady despite the ominous surroundings. "Only those who are worthy can survive here. You must prove yourself, Leo. You must overcome the darkness inside yourself and embrace the power of your family's promise." Leo didn't fully understand what she meant, but he could feel something stirring inside him. The crystal in his pocket seemed to hum in response, and the energy around him shifted. The shadows, once distant, began to move toward them, growing in number. From the darkness, a figure emerged, a towering creature made of shadow and flame, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. It was more monstrous than anything Leo had ever seen, a twisted form of pure evil. Its voice rumbled like thunder as it spoke. "Your family's promise is nothing," the creature sneered. "You are nothing." Leo's heart pounded. The air felt thick with dread. But there was something else now, a surge of power, deep inside him, rising like an untapped well of energy. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing the crystal. The moment he touched it, it pulsed with a brilliant light, and for the first time, Leo felt connected to something far greater than himself. The shadow creature advanced, its movements swift and terrible, but Leo didn't step back. He stood tall, his mind focused on one thing: protecting the alien girl, fulfilling his family's promise. This was his trial, his final test. He wasn't about to fail now. With a roar, the creature lunged at him, its claws reaching for his throat. But just as it was about to strike, Leo raised his hand, the crystal glowing fiercely in his palm. A wave of energy burst from it, sending the creature staggering back. The air around Leo crackled with power, and he could feel the crystal's energy flooding through him, filling every fiber of his being with strength. His vision blurred for a moment as his body became one with the energy of the crystal, one with the promise his family had sworn to uphold. "Fight, Leo." The alien girl's voice came through, steady and unwavering, guiding him. "You are the one. You are stronger than you know." The shadow creature roared, its form twisting and shifting, but Leo stood firm. He could see now that the creature was not just an enemy. It was a manifestation of every fear, every doubt he had ever had. The trial was not just about defeating the creature. It was about overcoming himself. He raised his hand once more, and this time, the crystal pulsed with a blinding light, the energy radiating from him like an unstoppable force. The creature screamed as the light overwhelmed it, its form disintegrating into nothingness. The darkness that had consumed it faded away, leaving behind only silence. Leo stood there, breathing heavily, his body shaking with exhaustion. But the trial was over. The darkness had been defeated, not by strength alone, but by the power of belief, of purpose, and of the promise that had been passed down through his family for generations. The alien girl stood beside him, her eyes filled with something like pride. "You did it, Leo," she said softly. "You are the one. The gate will open for you now." And as she spoke, the swirling red sky above them began to shift, the darkness giving way to a bright golden light. The city's gates, once locked and distant, began to open. The final trial was over, and Leo had proven himself worthy. But even as he stepped forward toward the gates, he knew this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The resolution. As Leo and the alien girl stepped toward the glowing gates of the city, the air seemed to hum with anticipation. The golden light that poured from the city illuminated everything around them, casting long shadows over the cracked, barren land. The gates, massive and imposing, creaked open slowly, as though the very structure of the city was awakening, recognizing Leo's success in the trial. The moment they crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The air was cooler here, filled with a strange, soothing energy that seemed to ease the tension in Leo's muscles. It felt like a sanctuary, a place untouched by the darkness that had plagued the world outside. But even within the safety of the city's walls, Leo could sense that the battle wasn't truly over. The shadows might have retreated for now, but their presence still lingered, like a storm just out of sight, ready to return. The alien girl beside him moved with purpose, her gaze scanning the city. She led him through a series of towering spires and winding streets, their steps echoing in the quiet. The city, although breathtakingly beautiful, had a hollow feel to it, as if the people who once lived there were gone, leaving only the remnants of a forgotten civilization. Leo couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking through the ruins of a lost world, a place that had once been alive with energy and purpose. Finally, they arrived at the heart of the city. An ancient temple, its massive stone pillars etched with symbols that seemed to glow with a faint light. The alien girl turned to Leo, her expression serious. "This is where the true journey begins," she said, her voice steady, but carrying an edge of something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. "This city is not just a sanctuary, it is the key to saving our worlds. And now, Leo, you must decide what you are willing to sacrifice to protect it." Leo stared at the temple before him, the weight of her words sinking in. He had thought the trial was the hardest part, that once they reached the city, everything would be over. But he realized now that it was only the beginning of a much larger fight, a fight that involved not just him, but the fate of two worlds, both his own and hers. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion and the weight of everything that had happened. "I've already fought. I've already made the promise. What more can I do?" She stepped closer, her eyes intense. "The promise your family made was not just to protect me. It was to protect the balance of the universe itself. The enemies we face are not just after me. They are after the power hidden in this city, power that can alter the very fabric of reality. That power is tied to both our worlds, and if they take it, everything will be destroyed." Leo felt his breath catch in his throat. The weight of the responsibility that had been passed down to him, the legacy of his family, had never felt heavier. He had always thought of himself as just an ordinary person, someone who could never be a hero. But now he was the key. His family's promise was no longer a distant story. It was a living, breathing truth that was tied to his very existence. "How do we stop them?" Leo asked, his voice filled with determination. He couldn't afford to back down now. There was no turning back. The alien girl's gaze softened, and for the first time, Leo saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "We must reach the heart of the city. There, the power is hidden, guarded by the spirits of my people. Only those who are worthy, those who have proven themselves in the trial, can unlock its true potential." She paused, looking down at the ground for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "But unlocking the power will come at a cost. It will require a sacrifice. One that only you can make." Leo's heart pounded in his chest as he processed her words. A sacrifice. What could he possibly give up to unlock the power that would save both worlds? The idea of losing something, of giving up everything he had fought for, was overwhelming. But deep down, he knew there was no other choice. Without another word, the alien girl led him into the temple. The air inside was thick with ancient energy, the walls lined with more glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with life. As they walked deeper into the heart of the temple, Leo's mind raced. What kind of sacrifice was required? And was he truly ready to face it? They arrived at a massive circular chamber at the center of the temple. In the middle of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a glowing crystal, a crystal that radiated with an almost blinding energy. It was the source of the power, the key to saving both worlds. Leo could feel it pulling at him, its energy resonating with the crystal, he still held in his pocket. "This is it," the alien girl said quietly. "This is what you must protect. This is the power that will either save us or destroy us. But Leo, to unlock it, you must make a choice." The air in the chamber seemed to crackle with anticipation. Leo stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for the glowing crystal on the pedestal. The moment his fingers brushed against it, the room around them shifted, and a voice filled his mind. A voice both ancient and powerful. "Only through sacrifice can the balance be restored." The words echoed in Leo's mind, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The crystal was now a part of him, its power coursing through his veins, but Leo knew that to truly unlock its potential, to protect the alien girl and her world, something had to be given up. He looked at the alien girl, who was watching him with quiet understanding. He knew then that the sacrifice wasn't just about him. It was about the promise, about his family's legacy, and about the future of both worlds. He had come this far, and now, to protect everything he loved, he would have to give up something he could never get back. As the crystal's power surged through him, Leo made his choice. It wasn't just his life that was at stake. It was the lives of everyone he cared about. And in that moment, he understood. The true power of the promise was not in the victory, but in the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect those who mattered. The energy in the room exploded outward, the power of the crystal unlocking in a surge of light. The alien girl stood by his side, her eyes filled with gratitude and respect. Together, they had unlocked the key to saving their worlds, and as the light spread across the temple, Leo knew that this was the beginning of something much larger. The gates of the city had opened. The final test had been passed. And now, the real battle was just beginning.